Hello and welcome back to our final two lecture videos for this semester. My apologies for getting this out much later than I had originally told you and anticipated that these were going to be out. But hopefully they still help you in formulating and constructing your ideas around what you want to write about in terms of your final exam essay that you have for me. That'll be due next Monday, May 2nd. But today I do want to talk about conflicts. And I want to talk about, go into more depth about the conflicts that I presented to you in the discussion board this week when you're reading through the Flash. And the first conflict that I do want to start with is person versus person. I want to get that out the way, mostly because it's the most common conflict that we typically come in contact with, which is sort of like a protagonist and an antagonist sort of tension and conflict. Like one person, our main character, is having to battle or duke it out, or maybe even maybe not duke it out necessarily, but they're having conflict or having tension. They're having this antagonist is standing in their way of reaching their goal. The next one though is person versus self. Person versus self, of course, is when your protagonist, right, is dealing with sort of an internal conflict, internal mental struggles with themselves, right? What I wanted to sort of talk about in terms of person versus self is the fact that these internal struggles, these mental internal struggles, are not necessarily separate from being caused by outside forces. So you might have a character that has serious self-esteem or self-confidence issues, and they have to work through that and gain their confidence back. But that doesn't mean that their lack of self-esteem is completely came about because of them themselves. Past trauma could have affected this, past trauma from family probably telling them they weren't good enough or whatever happened in their life before, all these things come into a factor. So I even though it's person versus self, a lot of that person versus self is just the person dealing with their past trauma and trying to get over that. And that past trauma is usually always because of an antagonistic character or an antagonistic force or antagonist or certain circumstances that have shaped our character to now have these sort of mental and internal struggles with themselves. Another conflict is person versus society, in which our main character, our protagonist, then has to sort of not only face one person or themselves, right, that one person being themselves or that one person being somebody else, but they have to face whole institutions. They have to face the greater wide society. Maybe there are roadblocks in the way keeping our protagonists from reaching their goals or something like that. I'm thinking about characters or movies more so Remember the Titans with Denzel Washington's character. He is the first black head coach of this newly integrated school, and he has to sort of deal with the fact that he lives within a world that is not very open to racial togetherness and harmony, and so he has to sort of struggle with that throughout the movie. I'm thinking about Hidden Figures, played by Taraji P. Henson's character, Katherine Johnson, who, works within the institution of NASA, which is just being sort of kind of in the beginning stages of being newly integrated and having to do with the disrespect and how people don't treat her fairly, as she is just trying to also work within this confines. So the institutional base thing, right, of NASA. And them not being open to sort of a more racially integrated space, but then also the Remember the Titans thing, where it's all the wider society not really being open to a racially integrated thing. So I'm also thinking about there's another conflict, person versus machine and first person versus technology. I'm thinking about books like Frankenstein. Even though Frankenstein is still a technology based, it's still Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is still a technology-based novel in which our character, he creates this monster. He sort of collects dead corpses, and he uses science and energy and stuff like that to sort of bring to life. He creates life himself. It's a very creationist, godlike story, right? And a lot of person versus technology are kind of in that same realm, if you notice. A lot of times the person, our protagonist, has created this technology, right? Thinking about Terminator and stuff like that, thinking about like the Matrix or whatever, like stuff like this, where like people have created this technology that has sort of then becomes a mirror and a reflection for human beings to sort of like look back at themselves and see their wrongdoings, and also puts people in the god position, because essentially, you know, the god trope is sort of like God created us, right? And then kind of people, you know, I guess the the idea is that people don't really obey God, right? And so now people are creating these like technologies and machines that are also disobeying in some form or some shape or another, disobeying their creators as well, which is us. And so now we get to sort of turn, it's like almost like a turn mirror around, like to see how we have done wrong, to see how we have like overstepped our bounds. Usually those are some tropes and some themes usually within these stories as well. I'm thinking about like I, Robot, with Will Smith's character versus Sonny, right? And how like even in those scenes where like almost literally Sonny is put up as a reflection of humanity and, you know, how humans are. I'm thinking about person versus nature, which is another conflict as well. Typically apocalyptic at times, not always. When I'm talking about not always, I'm thinking about things like Moby Dick, right? Like the Great Whale, the Great Whale. But nature almost acts as a godlike figure, right? So usually the trope or the storyline or the story or the narrative has to do with man coming to terms with their own mortality, or humanity coming to terms with its own mortality. Usually like I said before, nature acts as a godlike character in which like nature acts as like almost like it's like Judgment Day. Like, will humans, you know, it usually like, I guess in a sense fights back or bites back, and humans are given like this judgment day in which, you know, will human beings, you know, rise to the occasion, or will they fall, and then that will be their judgment, is that they will die, right? So I'm thinking about like all the way back, you know, we've gotten a lot of like apocalyptic movies ever since Day After Tomorrow, but I think also just because of like climate change and stuff like that, right? More and more apocalyptic end of the world movies that sort of center around climate change and stuff like that, because we are abusing the earth. And so like this idea that the earth is going to come back, you know, this godlike character, Mother Earth, is going to come back to bite us in the ass, bring down their judgment because we have not decided to change our ways. Last but not least, there is the person versus fate conflict that usually deals with a character or a main character dealing with trying to grapple with the fact that this prophecy or destiny has been bestowed upon them, right? So usually either we see our character either trying to live up to that destiny, struggling to try to live up to that destiny, or we see the other end of it where it's like they don't want to live up to that destiny. They don't want any parts of their destiny. They actually don't want to have anything to do with like any prophecies, or they just want to live their life like, separate from like the expectations of what they're supposed to do. And in terms of the first one's the struggling to live up to one's destiny, I would say like Hercules is a good example of that. Even the Disney version, right? Like we see him struggle to sort of like he wants to be a god. In order to be a god, he has to go through all these tests, and so he sort of struggles to like complete all of these tests in order to be a full god, right? So that's the struggling to live up to one's destiny kind of trope. The other one where the protagonist does not want anything to do with their destiny or prophecy, more contemporary, is Harry Potter. So Harry Potter really doesn't want anything, like you've watched and you've read a lot of the books, right? I think I have them right over here. You'll know, or you'll see that like Harry doesn't really want to, you know, I mean the the prophecy, or what is to be determined, or what is his fate and his destiny, is that he is supposed to like meet up with Voldemort again and have this sort of showdown, this sort of final showdown with him, right? Like that's always been set into motion, because they met, him, Voldemort as a man who was going to kill Harry because he thought that, he was going to best him one day. So he thought, oh, he's the most powerful wizard, so I need to get rid of him before he even has a chance. That ends up backfiring. And so they are destined again to meet again. We all know it's coming, right? They're destined to meet again to have this final showdown to see who is the most powerful wizard of them all, right? And that is his destiny. And he doesn't really want to... Harry is very reluctant. He doesn't really want any parts of that, right? He struggles with this idea, that he has to, be the one to, go against Voldemort for a very long time. I think it takes him up until all the way until the end that he finally realizes that he has no choice. He has to do this thing. And so, yeah, but Harry Potter's a good example of that. Hopefully this helps you in your discussions, and also in your Discord discussions, and also in your final paper. And I'll see you all next time for the next video.